obviously you can't predict the future, and we'll see what happens this summer. But would you be willing to take less money?
Bro, I'm not answering your questions no more. I'm sorry. Next question.
Now, back to Steiny and Guru on 95.7 The Game.
That's Nick Friedell. And this is Nick Friedell, ESPN. He's in studio with myself. John Dickinson in Boston. He'll be there for tip-off Game 6. And I'm just going to throw it over to JD right now because you got some action you want to talk about.
Yeah, just some special news regarding Friedell and the weekend here. Whitey Gleason having to miss this weekend and this Saturday's Warriors This Week show. And so we're getting the band back together for Saturday. Nick's going to be joining me from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. on Warriors This Week. He began the season doing that show with me, and then Whitey took over and has been tremendous when Nick went to the East Coast. And now, as luck would have it, and the way things work out sometimes, ironically enough, he gets what could very well be the last Warriors This Week, and we could be talking about the Warriors winning a fourth NBA championship in 8 years. Also, quickly, part of it, too, that I know Warrior fans don't want this to happen, but if there's a Game 7, Nick's going to be doing pre- and post-game with me.
Oh, nice.
From Chase Center. So, yeah, we're able to get Nick in the building. So if there's a Game 7, pre- and post-game, JD and Friedell.
So, in other words,
95.7 The Game.
I'll say, God forbid Warriors lose the next 2 games, but it would be the cheapest therapy session that you could go to after Game 7 if that were the case. I don't think that's going to happen, no. But I do think tomorrow night's game's interesting. And I'll just throw this out to you, Nick and JD. When I came in yesterday, I said to the producer, man, it feels like the Warriors kind of won the series last night. But then when you think about it, you're like, relax. Don't kind of do what everybody... Celtics 1 game away from a Game 7 where anything can happen. You know? 1 game.
They just have to get it there.
Right.
And if you're the Warriors and Steph, you want it over. You want to do anything you possibly can not to extend this thing. But, guys, I can't tell you how much I enjoy being back with y'all. It's going to be fun as hell watching that game tomorrow because around the league, I think everyone's kind of going, oh, my gosh, the Warriors are about to do this again. Right. And it is stunning given where things have been the last couple seasons. But to see Steph stay at this level and to see my man Andrew Wiggins completely change the narrative about his career, we've talked about it and talked about it all season, but I cannot remember a player at this stage of his career changing the way so many people think about him. And it's a credit to all the work that he's put in and how he's fit in out here. But the Warriors are really, really on the verge of something that not only is incredibly special, but is so unbelievable given where this season started.
Now, Nick, I got to get your read on this because I know you left to go cover primarily the Brooklyn Nets, and they went out in the first round against this Celtics team that the Warriors are facing, and then you got thrown on the Heat once the Nets were eliminated, so you covered them all the way through the conference finals when the Celtics eliminated them. But what's your sense, just from being around those two teams in particular, of just how they would feel about what the Warriors have been able to do and win the championship when there was so much on Brooklyn maybe being that juggernaut team, and Miami had the incredible regular season, but we know who they are as a franchise over the last couple of decades. What's your sense for just how those franchises specifically view the Warriors maybe winning this chip?
JD, there would be an immense level of respect because the Celtics absolutely dominated Brooklyn. They played better defense as a team on Kevin Durant than any group I have ever seen. He just was not the same against that defense. Kyrie, after that unbelievable Game 1, didn't do much at all. The rest of the series, it was a sweep. And we had talked about this a few weeks ago, but the reason I felt comfortable that Boston was going to win this series was because Boston dominated most of that Miami series. They had these moments where they would just kind of fall asleep, and we've seen it again in this series with the Warriors, but they would fall asleep, and you go, what are they doing? And then Jimmy Butler had a couple incredible performances, But Boston dominated the Eastern Conference Finals. They just strung it out into 7 games and were able to sneak away with that win in Miami. And you get to this series, JD, people all year long have not given the Warriors enough credit for their defense. To me, that has been such a huge difference because Boston thought they would come in, move the ball around, have success offensively. It just hadn't happened the same. But as we get set for Game 6, the key, as always with this Boston team, is are they going to take care of the ball? When they take care of the ball, they win. If they're throwing it all over the place and they're turning it over, they just don't have enough weapons to make up for it.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons I love the NBA playoffs. I say this a lot is because at the end of the season, 31 teams, you see what they don't have, what they're weak. Like everything is exposed. And you talk about the turnovers. And my feeling on the turnovers with Tatum and Brown is, maybe they're just not tight enough with the ball. Maybe they're not quite the decision makers they need to be yet. And whether that's the Warriors' defense or them needing to tighten stuff up, but that's kind of the one thing. Now I'm looking at Boston. They won Game 1. Well, Tatum had 13 assists and only 2 turnovers that game. Mm-hmm. Well, they lost Game 2. Well, guess what? He turned the ball over a lot. So, that's what, to me, the Celtics' issue is. Their kind of decision. It's Tatum's decision-making along with Brown's decision-making, and whether it can be tighter than it's been in their 3 losses.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Steiny, if Boston wants to extend the series, it has to be. And this is another key component in all of this, and we hear so much about championship DNA, and these guys have had this experience. That's where I think this is crucial, because Tatum and Brown and so many of the guys on that Boston roster, they just haven't been through this type of pressure cooker. And it is different, and you need to know how to handle it, especially when you do make mistakes early in a game. And Boston is trying to learn on the fly, and who knows, maybe they can still pull out these next couple games. But the Warriors, when they've needed that answer, have found it more often than not, and it is always going to start with Steph. And I cannot tell you, having covered this team the last 3.5 years or so, how much it would mean not only to Steph, but so many of the people within the organization, because they knew that people had written him off. They knew how many people around the league thought, this is probably it for Golden State, and now they have this chance to seize the time in front of them and get a title that I just don't believe, even internally, anybody thought was going to come this year.
All right, I'm Matt Steinmetz. You just heard Nick Friedell, ESPN. He's in studio here. John Dickinson, our main man, is in Boston, where he'll be for Game 6 tomorrow night. Big show for you today. A lot of great guests. And one of them's sitting right next to me, Nick Friedell. Let me throw this at you, JD, because we were kind of talking about this, and I'll be honest. When did you think the Warriors could win it all?
Well, Nick remembers this because I sent him a text back in November, and I want to make sure I get the date right on it. But it was the night that the Warriors won in Brooklyn early in the season, November the 16th.
Oh my.
There was the big showdown game in Brooklyn, and the Warriors went in there and won that game relatively easily. And I don't remember exactly what their record it was at that point in time. We'll have to dig it up. But I remember texting Nick, who was there, and it was. I said, I think they can win it. And Nick kind of, he gave me the text version of the.
Hold on there. So hold on, my man. But he was absolutely right. And Steiny, I remember when JD sent it, it was for Warriors fans who are listening to us thinking, wait a minute, which game? That was in Barclays when half the arena was screaming MVP for Steph.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And so not only have they dominated a Nets team that so many people thought was going to win the title this year, they did it on their home floor against KD. And to what JD is saying about that's when he thought it was possible, I'd raise it even a level higher and say I think a lot of people in that locker room after that game started to go, maybe there is something serious here. Because I remember being in Staples at shoot-around before regular season game 1, and Draymond said straight up, we got a long way to go before we get back to being a team that can contend for a championship. And so for them, from the beginning of the season in October to get to this point where they are one game away, that confidence level just built and built and built, and everybody was on the same page. And it is a credit to not only the players, but the staff, the coaching staff, and the front office.
And I'll give you one more playoff moment where it was solidified for me, because everything's different in the playoffs, and we all know the Warriors had a lot they had to get right and in the playoffs that they weren't able to get right in the regular season. The playoff moment for me, it actually doesn't even really relate to the Warriors. But the moment where I thought, hey, they're going to win this thing, and was when Phoenix got beat by Dallas in Game 7 of the semifinals on that Sunday night in Phoenix, where the Mavs went in there and just destroyed them, because I did not think Dallas had a shot to even be a threat at all to the Warriors in a conference final series. And it was really that same weekend when, was it Boston or Milwaukee? What was it going to be? It wound up being Boston. But as far as the Miami-Boston series, tipped it for me just because Boston showed me maybe they didn't quite have enough to beat the Warriors. That's kind of the third little piece. But Phoenix and Dallas, for the Warriors, Steiny, to not have to play Memphis and Phoenix and Boston potentially at the end, that to me was enough to where, all right, I think they got enough in the tank, even if they break down a little bit, to be able to get over the hump.
Yeah, I guess for me it was probably after the Memphis series. Because going into the playoffs, I still didn't think kind of they were going to be able to hold it together. And at the beginning of the playoffs, I thought, people don't realize it's 10 weeks. You got to stay healthy, and they weren't healthy all year together. And looking back at that may have been a silver lining. That their three best players, none of them played a full season, and I get Steph played most of the season, but what a perfect 11 games to take off right before the postseason.
And I want to be clear here, Nick, before you jump in. I'm not saying Phoenix would have beat the Warriors. The point I'm making is I think Phoenix would have challenged the Warriors 6-7 games in a different way than Dallas did or didn't. And that, as we look at this series now, 3-2 Warriors with Game 6 in Boston tomorrow, may have been a tipping point to where they didn't have enough left in the tank for the Boston series specifically. I do still think, Nick, they would have beat Phoenix.
100%. 100%. And I think everybody is laying out all the reasons why. And Steiny, I go back to that Memphis series, and you do have to catch breaks. I mean, that's part of the deal. Right. When you win a title, you've got to catch breaks along the way. The Warriors have, but they've taken advantage of them. Other teams have caught breaks.
Exactly.
And it hadn't always worked out the same way. There's one other moment I can think to in the context of this conversation, and it was that Christmas game in Phoenix when the Suns were fully healthy and the Warriors were dealing with a whole bunch of different injuries and guys weren't on the floor, and Quindary from the G League had come up and he's getting some minutes. They beat Phoenix, and Draymond, who then tested positive for COVID, I think, that night or later on the next day, he is walking out of there with his chest puffed out all the way going, oh yeah. This is a team that's supposed to knock us off in the playoffs. Good luck with that. So everybody around middle of November and into Christmas started to look at each other going, we're legit.
Right.
And the defense is there, and we have Steph. And in the end, as we're seeing in this series especially, that is exactly what the keys have been. And if Steph carries them one more time, they're going to get another title.
But and here's the other thing that I believe. They didn't think it was. I don't want to say they didn't think it was in the realm of possibility, but this is one of the things I always think about with Don Nelson, that these guys who are in the NBA, whether they're players or coaches, they know how good they are. And they know where they really fit in the pecking order. And Don Nelson knew when he had terrible teams, and he didn't even try to fake it or pretend it. And I think there's enough proof now and enough evidence to say for sure that Steph, Clay, and Draymond were unsure. that they could get back to this point at the beginning of the season. Bob Myers and Joe Lacob were unsure. They didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility, but it wasn't. Joe Lacob wasn't as confident as he usually is. Oh, we're definitely going to get back there. We're definitely going to get back there. They needed the 18-2 start. They needed whatever happened to happen. And then I think you're right. Halfway through the season or at some point, they're like, and nobody out there that we can't beat. And then at that point, because, I mean, the other thing is look at the statements that Iguodala made about you can't thread the needle, essentially. And he went as far as to say it's not really even fair to the young guys or the old guys. So, I'm not saying they're blown away, but they needed to convince themselves.
They did need to convince themselves, and I think the other part is they're threading the needle, but they really haven't been dependent on the young guys. And I think that's something that really does need to be pointed out and acknowledged. Jordan Poole, yes, and we've talked about Jordan Poole and Wiggins, Nick. We were talking about it in the first segment before you joined us, how those two players specifically have made up for what the Warriors lost in Kevin Durant, whether it's scoring, whether it's a wing that can play defense, just overall size. Those two have been the key cogs there. But this team hasn't relied on Wiseman or Kuminga or Moody. They've played, and at times they've even played well and flashed a bright future in the case of both Kuminga and Moody, Nick. But they did, while those players were still on the roster, build the roster to where Otto Porter, Gary Payton, who's not a young guy, NBA experience-wise, yes, but overall. And so I think, you look at that, and this is essentially a veteran team that's been able to do this.
And this, guys, as you all have discussed throughout the last couple months, this is where it goes back to the front office. Because we can talk all we want about the way that Steph and Draymond earlier in the year and everybody has played, but I don't think anybody in the world, JD, especially you and I, when it happened, thought Otto Porter and Bielitsa and Iguodala earlier in the year, when those were the moves, everybody kind of went, what? And then Gary Payton, the second, starts the season. You're like, all right, well, this is the 15th guy. He's really never going to play anyway. To your point, JD, they didn't need the threading of that needle. They didn't need how's it going to work with one core and trying to develop the second core. They haven't really needed them to get to this point. So everything had to work the way in which it did. It has. And I'd say this, guys, and Steiny, this goes back to your point about the organization not really believing, at least early in the year, that this was a legit possibility. I always felt, having been around everybody from top to bottom, that the Warriors thought their best chance at a title was actually next year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great point.
Because of Clay being able to knock the rust off this year and finding a rhythm with the Wisemans and Kumingas and Pooles, because Poole was supposed to be in the group with Moody and Kuminga and has taken this even bigger leap than he took last season. So I think now there's a chance that this window is open a little bit more, because always internally it was, all right, let's see what happens this year, but next year's probably our best chance. Now they're on the verge of doing it 1 year in with one more win.
And just another thing that changed for me is I'm watching the Warriors get off to an 18-2 start, and you know who's right in the middle of it? Is Iguodala.
Yep.
Iguodala was huge the first 20
guys
games.
Playing were those guys.
So now all of a sudden, Iguodala, of course, starts getting banged up, and I remember saying to JD, they can't win it without that Iguodala.
Right.
Well, he never played as well as he played in those first 20 games, and they're still poised to win it.
Has he played 20 games since?
I don't think so.
But that shows you how deep this roster has been, that they weren't as reliant on all these different people that they needed to be, and they've gotten contributions all the way through. It's just been a really magical year for the Warriors, and they have a chance to cap it off.
All right, here's what's going on. I'm Matt Steinmetz, Nick Friedell, ESPN in studio, John Dickinson in a Boston studio, Daryl the Guru Johnson good for him, is at his son's graduation. We have Game 6 tomorrow night at coming to you from Boston. 4:30 Warriors Live with Damon and Ratto, and then 6 o'clock tip-off in Boston.
You got to go out there and be tough.
What's your gut telling you, guy? What's your gut telling you about tomorrow? Are we watching a Game 7 on Father's Day, gents? I don't even know if you guys are fathers. Not that it matters.
No. But I have been wrong at every step in the season, in this series. So I wholeheartedly believe there'll be a Game 7, which probably absolutely means that this thing ends tomorrow night with Steph hoisting the trophy and the Finals MVP.
I think there's going to be a Game 7. That's my lean right now, and you just there are a couple of markers for me, and it's the Warriors with the 3 previous series. They've had a chance to close out on the road. They've lost all 3 of those games, and then what do? They go home and they win the next game after that, and I feel like that's where this thing is headed. I think the Celtics, you got to go all the way back to March, the last time they lost 2 in a row before Game 4 and Game 5. And so, I mean, to see them lose 3 in a row, and look, maybe the Warriors broke them with the late third, fourth quarter at Chase on Monday, but I think they've been too resilient a team to just go down without a fight. And I think this series, while the Warriors have had enough in the fourth quarter the last 2 games, has still been pretty even to me. And so I just feel like it's going to be kind of even tomorrow, and maybe the Celtics have one run that the Warriors don't. And then you add it up, and it's 3-3, which is essentially a chalk series, highly competitive, and you give the Warriors an advantage, I think, going into Sunday at that point. But I do kind of feel like we're heading back 3-3 with a game Sunday. I really do.
Yeah, and I really feel like these two teams are evenly matched. It's really close. And, you know, I look at the Warriors tomorrow night, and listen, I know you want to try to convince yourself it's a Game 7 if you're the Warriors, but that's really, really hard to do. It's going to be easy for Boston to play with their hair on fire tomorrow. So now if you're the Warriors, you kind of make that decision of how much do you go for it tomorrow if you're down 10 with or, you know, because, you know, and this goes for both teams, you know, you don't want to be in either a good or bad position, but maybe have a guy get nicked up for a Game 7. So I'm not saying look for the Warriors to raise the white flag if they get down 8, but that may come into it too a little bit, JD.
And I think the other thing that's interesting, and maybe this helps the Warriors, maybe it doesn't. I really don't know. You could make a case for both, but they're going to be able to taste it tomorrow. Going into the game, they're going to be able to taste it. They know going in the game, 48 minutes, you're the champs. That hits a little different, I think, in particular for the players that haven't gone through it and won it before. But I also think it hits a little bit different for the guys that have and that maybe didn't necessarily believe that they could be back in this position quickly. We've seen the Warriors in the past struggle a little bit with the closeout game, which is tough enough, the closeout game on the road, but now the closeout game on the road where it's win a freaking title.
Right.
I just, you know, maybe it ends up helping the Warriors, I don't know, but I just feel like that's another level of different for tomorrow's game compared to any of the other games they've played in the playoffs. Yeah,
and you know what, JD, I was kind of thinking that too. And maybe that does work to the Warriors' advantage. Let's face it, they lost Game 7 to Cleveland. They lost the Game 6 to Toronto, but like they know nothing kind of good can come of a Game 7, even though obviously they can win it. But yeah, like they know how important it is or how big it would be to clinch tomorrow. All right, Nick, thanks for coming in. We're going to be hearing a lot from you this week. We're all looking forward to it. Bob Fitzgerald on the other side, and it's all sponsored by Chilton Auto Body.
I don't agree with that, Nick.